Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. As you know, we cover a lot of sensitive topics in the LDS space, and many of those podcasts are about LGBTQ. Today's podcast will not. It will be from a guest that's in the middle of a civil lawsuit because of being a sexual assault survivor and going through that difficult road of being a sexual assault victim. As I read her outline and been visiting with her, I'm just overcome with her courage and how brave she is to be able to share her story. Her name is Heather Prinz, Prinz. Welcome to the podcast, Heather.
Thank you for having me.
Just a little background on Heather. She lives in Fayetteville, Arkansas. She's a speech pathologist, a married mother of four. They have four boys, ages 9 to 17. She grew up in Northern California. I asked her where she met her husband. She met him in school before they went off to college. So she married her high school sweetheart, and they've made their way to Arkansas, where they're raising their family. They're active in the church. Her husband's the local bishop in their ward in the Fayetteville area. Some of you may be aware of the Dr. Broadbent story in Utah County, and many women have come forward. And she is one of those victims that is part of a civil suit that is now making its way through court. There's been over 200 victims that are part of that civil suit. There are also victims part of the criminal suit. That has a statute of limitations. That's a lower volume. The reason Heather is doing this podcast is really out of courage to help other victims of sexual assault, perhaps victims in this case, but victims in other cases, to understand their victims, to understand why they didn't do anything wrong, and Heather sharing her road to find more hope and healing maybe gives hope to others walking a similar road. I think it also helps those of us that are not victims to be able to have better tools to support those that are. I know I had very little tools in this space 10 years ago and wouldn't know what to say to somebody, and might have said really unkind things like, you're overthinking this, or, this really didn't happen. And I'm sorry to say those things out loud, Heather, because I'm sure you heard those. But we said a prayer, and I'm just going to turn it over to Heather to share her story. She'll share the facts of her case so that everybody's clear on what happened, and then just talk about where the civil case is working its way through. She's going to talk about an Instagram account that they've put together, and that's how you can contact Heather and other resources in this space. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Okay, great. Thank you. Before I start, because there are over 200 of us, I want to just make it clear that I'm not speaking for the group at all. This is my own individual experience, my own thoughts, and all of that. So I'm speaking as Heather, not for everybody. So in February of 2022, just out of the blue, I received a text message from one of my best friends who lives near Salt Lake City. And the text said something like, hey, isn't this the doctor that delivered who is my oldest son? And it was a screenshot of a news article about 4 Jane Does filing a sexual assault lawsuit against a Provo OBGYN with a photo of Dr. David H. Broadbent. I'm emotional. This is even the hard part. Okay. I read that message, and it was like my entire world crumbled around me. I didn't even need to read the article because I already knew what it would say. I remember frantic words in my mind. Oh no, you were right. Oh no, it wasn't just you. Frantic. For the first time in over 15 years, I was forced to finally acknowledge and accept what happened to me as Dr. Broadbent's patient. And for the first time, again, in over 15 years, I allowed those words in my head. I was sexually assaulted by Dr. Broadbent. And so right after I gathered all my thoughts together, picked myself up off the floor, I ran to find my husband, and he heard those words for the first time that I also heard them come out of my mouth. I had never heard that come out of my mouth, and I had never allowed those thoughts to be clearly stated in my mind. And I was absolutely not prepared for the mental breakdown that hit. And I don't say mental breakdown lightly, like sometimes we kind of joke, oh, I had this a mentee B this weekend or whatever, like a legit mental breakdown. I was in the middle of graduate school. Our house had just flooded. And it really was like everything crumbled around me. And I could not understand how something that had happened so long ago felt like it had just happened yesterday. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I'd lost a lot of weight. I wasn't hearing people talking to me. My kids might be talking to me at the dinner table, and I would be just staring off into space. I laid in bed, reliving detailed memories of my appointments with Dr. Broadbent. I could not turn it off. I had no control over it. And I was convinced that something was deeply wrong with me. To be so affected by something that had happened so long ago. A month or so later, still trying to come to terms with this fact and still struggling deeply, I was scrolling through Yahoo News and I came across an article that 50 more women had joined the lawsuit. At that point, I had been so upset that there were 5 because there were 4 plus me. And sobbing with rage and shame and guilt and self-disgust, I sent the lawyer an email adding myself to the list of victims. Oh, I'm sorry, this really isn't even the hard part. I need to. Okay.
You're doing great.
So to give you a quick Reader's Digest version of everything since then, our lawsuit, which then totaled 94 Jane Does, including some of those women were underage girls and or in foster care at the time of their assault. Maybe like 15-year-old pregnant foster child would come in. Those are some of the victims in the lawsuit, which is I don't think has been talked about, but it's horrific. And another part about the lawsuit is that Dr. Broadbent is named in the lawsuit as well as 2 major hospital systems in the area, Intermountain Health and Mountain Star Health, that received complaints about Dr. Broadbent, who was he didn't directly work for them, but he had hospital privileges where he delivered babies for decades. He was an on-call doctor for decades. They received these complaints and they never investigated him. They never revoked his license. They never did anything, and he continued to abuse his patients and their patients for decades. So their argument, Dr. Broadbent, Intermountain Health, and Mountain Star Health, their argument to the judge about our lawsuit was that sexual assault is considered to be within the realm of healthcare and therefore can only be filed under a medical malpractice lawsuit, which, by the way, has a statute of limitations of 2 years. So almost all of us would have been excluded from that, which was their goal. During a hearing to try to get the case dismissed, while I watched from my locked bedroom in Arkansas, Intermountain Health attorney David Jordan made this argument, and this is a direct quote. He said, "Improper treatment can still be healthcare, even when it is intentional." I couldn't believe my ears. It was like I was in the Twilight Zone. And we listened to arguments like that from both hospitals and Dr. Broadbent's attorneys saying, like, well, of course he's got to touch their private parts. That's his job. And that we were young and naive and didn't know that going to a gynecologist would entail pelvic exams, things like that. And believe it or not, our lawsuit was dismissed in October 20 of 22 after Judge Lennon determined that although he agreed our allegations against Dr. Broadbent were horrible and reprehensible, our sexual assault at the hands of Dr. Broadbent was legally considered part of the medical treatment we received, and we could not file a sexual assault lawsuit against a physician that sexually assaulted us.
Wow.
Yeah, it really, for those of us already struggling, it was a huge, I don't even know the word, like slap in the face is not a strong enough word. It was like being hit by a truck, and we couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Our attorneys immediately appealed that decision to the Utah Supreme Court, who agreed to take the case. And in October of last year, after a lot of emotional work to get to the point to emotionally go to that, my husband and I went out to Salt Lake for those oral arguments where members of the Utah Supreme Court listened to both sides argue about whether sexual assault by a physician is considered part of healthcare. While I was in Salt Lake, because like we said, I live in Arkansas, many of us Jane Does were able to meet each other for the first time in person.
Wow.
And begin to have relationships with each other and just know each other's stories and know who each other were and feel not so alone in all of it. Many of us have interacted online working on our Instagram page, which is at That's Not Healthcare, to help spread awareness about not only our lawsuit, but other similar lawsuits of physician sexual assault around the country, which is not an unheard of thing. If you just Google it, you will see several pages of current and past lawsuits with this, with various numbers of victims. And another important part of the That's Not Healthcare page is raising awareness about what you should and should not expect during an OBGYN appointment. All of us Jane Does who were able to make it to the Utah Supreme Court hearing, as well as our family members, our supporters, and our lawyers, we all wore teal to stand together emotionally and in solidarity in our argument that physician sexual assault cannot be healthcare. Teal is the color of sexual assault awareness. And so it was kind of special being there, as difficult as it was, because we were in teal. We knew that each other was there with each other. It just added this element of I don't know, holding hands and standing there strongly, not alone. And I bring up this part about all of us wearing teal because it becomes relevant later on in my story. Then this past August, so about 2 months ago, about 9 or 10 months after hearing the oral arguments, the Utah Supreme Court finally issued their decision, which we'd all been waiting for. The Utah Supreme Court ruled that physician sexual assault is not and never was healthcare.
Good.
And they overturned the dismissal of our lawsuit. We won our appeal. Without realizing it, I had tried to emotionally prepare myself for a loss, to be ready, because I wasn't ready first time. And so I tried to be ready for that so that it wouldn't throw me so deep as it did the first time. And so when I found out that we won, I was like, I was shocked at my reaction. My reaction was just absolute sobbing. I thought, like, I imagined a couple of times that I imagined we might win. It was like leaps and shouts of joy, and all of a sudden I just sobbed. It was just very validating. So now, as it sits today, our lawsuit can now move forward with now 213 Jane Does and counting against Dr. Broadbent and the two medical systems that protected him for decades. It's also important to note that this number 213 is only the number of women who have decided to join the lawsuit. It's not the number of women who have come forward, which is a larger number. There are so many women who have come forward, just in calling the lawyers and sharing their stories with lawyers saying, I was also a victim. I don't want to join the lawsuit, but I want to tell my story. There's that. And then there's other aspects of people who have just reached out to us. I have received phone calls from people who aren't reaching out to lawyers or anything. They're just telling me, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. And telling me all sorts of details that I recognize very clearly because I know what happened. It also doesn't include so many of his victims that are not aware of this lawsuit yet. Most of the news coverage over this has been in Utah. And as we all know, so Dr. Broadbent's office and the hospital systems around there, they were around BYU and UVU. Dr. Broadbent's office was very close to BYU. And a large, if not the majority of his patients were young BYU students. And as we all know, people come to BYU from all over the world, all over the country. They go to school and they move away to work, to family, wherever. So it's not like all of his victims are still, for 40 years sitting around Provo and Salt Lake and just seeing this on the local news. This is in states that this is not being covered in the news. I haven't seen it in Arkansas. My friends and family back in California have not seen it on the news through their news. It's been through me that they know about it. And so the estimated number of his victims is far higher than 213. He also he took Medicaid. He spoke Spanish. He had a revolving door for students and for people who were vulnerable, needing OBGYN care, and then after school, immediately moving away. So there's nothing by word of mouth. You see Dr. Broadbent, you are assaulted, maybe once, maybe repeatedly, and then you move away. And so there's people all over the country struggling with I don't know why I always have panic attacks when I go to the doctor, or I'm just not good around doctors and they don't know why yet. And a part of me is maybe a little bit jealous of that. Even kind of there's bliss in ignorance, but at the same time, there's a need to get the word out, because until you know what happened, you can't heal. And so also here coming up soon, November 4th, which is just a few weeks away, Dr. Broadbent is facing his first criminal charge in court. And you did differentiate, Richard, the difference between the civil lawsuit and the criminal complaints. There's been over 40 women who have made criminal complaints against him, and the DA at this point has only charged him with one count of sexual assault against one woman. She's a very brave woman. And although she's criminally facing him in court alone, I really say alone with finger quotes, because I don't know of many women standing alone like this who are surrounded by so many women really standing in front of her, behind her, on both sides. It's as if she is us. We all see her as ourselves. Looking back over the past 2.5 years, coming up on 3 years, I guess, in February, I can't help but think of the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it. The movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
No.
I won't be giving any spoilers because it's from the 1990s, but it's a movie that plays out two different ways. It plays out one way where she catches her husband cheating, and then one way where she doesn't, and how her life plays out the rest of the future from that moment on, how everything plays out just based off of whether she does or whether she doesn't. That exact moment changes the trajectory of her entire life. And it makes me think of that, just looking back just the last 2.5 years. And I'm still young. I have a lot of life to live. And it to me feels like, I don't know really how to explain it, but the Heather I was right before I read that text message is an entirely different Heather than the one that read the text message. It sent my life on a completely different trajectory than I ever would have been on. The things I've learned about, not only myself, but just about victims of sexual assault in general, have allowed me to be so much more compassionate towards myself, so much more forgiving to myself, and have allowed me to start letting go of my shame and guilt that has surrounded this. I started EMDR therapy shortly after joining the lawsuit because really I felt like I was broken. And I needed help, and I didn't think there was anything that could help me. During my first session, I told my therapist that above all, the most important thing through the whole entire thing, no matter what happened, was that I was able to remain anonymous. My greatest fear over anything happening, even us losing every single lawsuit, that wasn't my greatest fear was eventually having to get up on a stand and testify, and then everyone would know that I was a victim. Everybody would know what happened. Everybody would know what he did. The thought that anyone knowing what Dr. Broadbent did to me, how I reacted to it, how I stepped it away and refused to accept it was the absolute worst outcome in my mind. And little by little, the more I learned about how sexual assault affects people, I realized that my terrifying reaction, as if it had just happened yesterday, even though it was more than a decade ago, all of this didn't mean that something was wrong with me. My reaction that I had was actually a common clinical expectation. And that word is an important word. It's not something having severe reaction to this, even if it happened so long ago, is not something wrong with you or the way you're processing it or not moving on. It's an expectation that this is a very strong possibility that you will have these type of reactions. I learned that I did not react the way I did after each appointment with Dr. Broadbent because I was weak or pathetic. The quote resonated deeply with me. I don't know if you've heard this. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal behavior is a normal reaction. I think that's very empowering. Our reaction to what happened in something that never should have happened, that was shocking and scary and all types of things, an abnormal reaction to that is normal. I began learning so much about the shame and embarrassment associated with recounting details of sexual assault and living with it. I even saw it in my own written allegations. I had watered down my allegations because it was so horrendously painful to discuss, even if it was only in writing, even if it was to a complete stranger, even if they lived several states away. And at one point, my therapist said to me something like, well, of course, a sexual predator counts on their victim remaining silent. They rely on it. And she didn't say it at all in a victim shaming way. It was just explaining that the actual nature of sexual assault in and of itself is the reason why so many victims aren't out on the loudspeakers telling everybody who will listen what happened to them. And something about her comment, I think, mixed with all that was happening, all the rage I had building inside me, the upcoming Utah Supreme Court appeal that I didn't think I was strong enough to attend. I spent several nights, all night. Sometimes I slept a little bit. And I wrote a letter to Dr. Broadbent to put all my thoughts and feelings into words. And soon after, I decided to make my private secret letter that nobody knew I was writing. My husband didn't know I was writing it. I decided to make it an open letter to Dr. Broadbent. And before I released it into the wind, I read it to my therapist. And when she asked what my ultimate goal was in writing it, I would have liked for my answer to be, well, for Dr. Broadbent to read it. But the more I thought about it, I realized that wasn't really my ultimate goal. It didn't matter if he reads it or not. My ultimate goal was to write the words and to be okay that it makes me feel sick to write it. And it makes me feel sick to read it, and to be okay that it makes people uncomfortable. Reading about sexual assault should make people uncomfortable. I realize I don't want people to be comfortable when I tell them about my assault and how it affected me. My ultimate goal is that by sharing the details of the sickening words that were once the most important thing to keep anonymous about me meant to me that I was reclaiming my power from Dr. Broadbent, that he doesn't get to count on my silence, because in the end, none of the shame that sexual assault victims feel so deeply inside our souls, none of that is ours to bear. In the end, our assault has nothing to do with us and everything to do with them. Now, I want to be clear, by no means am I saying that to emotionally overcome your abuser, you have to come out publicly, you have to lose your anonymity, you have to, any of that. None of that has to happen. It's not required. For me, it was an important thing. Different parts of my life, it wasn't. And for lots of people, for very good reasons, it would be better for them to remain anonymous. Everybody's situation is completely different. So I want to make it clear that I absolutely do not think that this is some sort of thing in order to heal, you must come out with your story and share your words. That's not true. For some people, that anonymity might need to stay in place forever, and that's okay. And my therapist taught me that we can allow anger to turn into poison or a very powerful tool. And that to me felt very empowering. And I felt very enabled by that because I did have a lot of anger. And so that being said, I wrote my open letter not to declare this shameful thing that happened to me. I wrote it to declare the shameful thing that Dr. Broadbent did. The letter is called An Open Letter to My Abuser, Dr. David H. Broadbent, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. And Richard, with your permission and a big trigger warning disclaimer, I'd like to read it aloud if that's okay.
We'd love to have you read it.
Okay. Okay, an open letter to my abuser, Dr. David H. Broadbent, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. Dear Dr. Broadbent, do you remember me? It's me, Jane Doe. Rather than listen to the blaring sirens exploding through my body and mind, I continuously ask myself, what is wrong with me? What? I've never been able to read this without crying. I'm sorry. Why did I feel like I'd been degraded, sexually harassed, and sexually assaulted by my trusted OBGYN? Does my name ring a bell? Let me remind you of some of our time spent together. So this isn't an exhaustive list. It's just some things that happened. At my first appointment, you pulled me into your private office and you told me that when my husband loses his erection after sex, it doesn't mean I don't still look pretty laying there naked in bed. I rationalized that you must have me confused with a different patient, someone else who might find this explicit and unsolicited information somehow relevant. Multiple times after examining my private parts, you made the comment, well, your husband is a lucky man. and I reassured myself that you were merely trying to give me a compliment. With, without understanding how inappropriate and degrading that comment was. Do you remember me? With my, I can't even see the page. Ugh. With my feet in the stirrups, I scooted my bare butt down following your instruction, and then you manhandled me, grabbing my naked thighs and jerking my body down towards you as if I were a lifeless doll. Humiliated, I chastised myself for not scooting far enough. And later, I desperately searched the internet. I desperately searched the internet for possible medical reasons why, without any warning, you aggressively rammed your finger into my rectum after stating, "You're not gonna like this." For days, I held back tears and the urge to vomit as the scene played over and over in my head like a broken record. I agonized after my visits with you, but I reassured myself that you must be so desensitized to your line of work that you just didn't realize how incredibly repulsive, dehumanizing, and mortifying your exams felt to me. I tried to comfort myself with thoughts that a male OBGYN must not understand how vulnerable it feels to be in stirrups, covered with nothing but a thin paper sheet, and a strange man sitting between your open legs. I assured myself that you were probably very busy and didn't have time to explain what you were doing, or why it was necessary, or to make sure I had consented to any of it. Do you remember me? Sick to my stomach for days after you digitally sodomized me, I reassured myself that if it really was as bad as I thought, then surely the nurse who witnessed it would have said something. And you probably chuckled afterwards because my loud shriek and my shocked response of kicking out of the stirrups was so comically juvenile. And you were probably just so desensitized to rectally penetrating patients, you didn't realize how traumatic that could be for someone who was only expecting you to check how their vaginal stitches were healing. You probably forgot that I would need a warning, or explanation, or a choice in the matter. Exam visits with you were followed by days of nauseating self-reassurances that this disgusting feeling that I had been sexually assaulted by my doctor was nothing. Do you remember me? Even after scouring the internet and not being able to find any adequate medical descriptions of what you had done to me, I just couldn't. I just couldn't bring myself to believe that I had been sexually assaulted by my doctor, even though my intuition was screaming that I had. I knew a doctor would never do that. The only plausible conclusion was that the problem was me. Dear Dr. Broadbent, do you have any idea what that kind of self-discovery, in quotes, can do to a young woman just starting out on her life path? I'll tell you. If a woman believes that her intuition is so horribly broken that it could accuse a perfectly innocent man of sexual harassment, brutalization, and sexual assault, she learns her intuition cannot be trusted. And I cannot even begin to explain how a cognitive distortion like that can carry over into every aspect of a person's life. Throughout my adult life, I've had unexplained sense of terror in the presence of male physicians. The moment a male physician stepped inside my hospital room, heart monitors loudly declared sudden tachycardia. In hospital waiting rooms, I frantically begged my husband not to leave my side, and I often exaggerated my need for help in the bathroom because I was terrified that if I went in alone, I might come back out and find a doctor in my hospital room. But these internal reactions seemed crazy even to me. If I was in the hospital needing medical attention, shouldn't I have wanted a doctor in my room? Do you remember me? Living in Europe and pregnant with our third baby, I searched for an English-speaking doctor and had the choice between a male OBGYN in the nearest village or a female OBGYN in the city, but that required taking the train, a subway, and a city bus, and I gladly took the train. After moving back to the US, it took me over a year to find the courage to make a doctor's appointment to discuss some serious symptoms. The doctor was respectful, listened intently, ordered labs, and then he asked me when I'd had my last pap smear. I decided he was a pervert and I never went back. I was nervous for days before an appointment. I sat hyper alert through health exams, silently filled with terror, while I waited for him without warning to touch or cause physical pain to my private parts, make sexual comments about my body, or ask me to remove my clothes. Do you remember me, Dr. Broadbent? My world crumbled when I recently learned that I was not the only woman who suffered at your hands. I was not the only woman filled with a raging war while trying to reconcile the cognitive dissonance inside her. I was not the only woman who suffered for years from undiagnosed PTSD, which scarred my life in more ways than I will ever be able to adequately describe, all while somehow failing to register its cause or consciously acknowledge its presence. I want to make something abundantly clear. I have no qualms about the medical care you provided me. Unlike the defense claims, I was not some young, naive young woman who was unaware that a gynecologist would perform uncomfortable vaginal and breast exams. I had no complaints about you placing a speculum inside me to give me medically necessary pap smears. I never questioned the necessity of you inserting your fingers into my vagina to check the dilation of my cervix. You successfully delivered my beautiful baby boy and stitched up a tear. However, none of this is relevant to the mountain of trauma you unleashed upon me and so many other trusting, vulnerable women. When 4th District Court Judge Robert C. Lennon dismissed our lawsuit due to lack of jurisdiction, he ignored what was stated throughout hundreds of pages of allegations that we have not come forward because we are traumatized by your medical care. We came forward because you lured us into your office with the letters OBGYN, which you exploited to disguise and camouflage your repeated sexual harassment, brutalization, and sexual abuse. Your job title is completely irrelevant as to whether physician sexual assault can be considered medical treatment. The only relevant aspect of your profession is how you found your victims and how you got away with it for so long. You are a predator in a white coat, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Dr. Broadbent, I know you're an educated man, but let me teach you the premise of opposite. The opposite of up is down. The opposite of teaching a child to swim is holding them under the water while they drown. The opposite of fighting a fire is arson, and the opposite of medical care is intentional assault. By their very nature, purpose, and intention, up cannot be down, light cannot be dark, and sexual assault cannot be medical treatment. I've been in weekly therapy since the beginning of this nightmare, and where I was once sick at the thought of catching even the slightest glimpse of you, I now dream of the chance to look you in the eyes, which begs me to ask, you're coming to the public oral argument at the Utah Supreme Court on October 20th, right? I'll be there with some of the others. Look for me, I'll be wearing teal. Do you remember me, Dr. Broadbent? Because unfortunately, I cannot forget you. And then I signed it sincerely, Jane Doe, and I crossed it out in red and signed Heather with a red Sharpie. It's very hard for me to read that. I wrote it a year ago. I still can't read it without just completely tearing up. Hopefully that was understandable, at least most of it.
There's a lot of people that would love to come out of their headphones right now on the treadmills or driving or on an airplane or walking and just give you a big hug for your courage to write that letter and understand you are a victim of a sexual assault, multiple sexual assaults, and your courage to write that letter and then cross out Jane Doe and put your name. I'm just honored you feel safe sharing it on this platform.
I think it's important. It's difficult, but I think it's very important.
I love
Thank
that.
you.
I'm going to comment, just a comment. I want to keep sharing your stories. It's beautifully written. You have a gift of writing. I don't know if that's part of your academic work or just one of your God-given gifts, but this line you come back to, "Do you remember me?" is really powerful. And then I think of just you giving him the benefit of the doubt because of all the reasons you should, but then in your heart you knew this was wrong, and it caused you pain, and it caused you to be uncomfortable, and you separated the things he did that were appropriate as an OBGYN that you recognized were part of his job and helped you have children. But the things that were not part of his job, you recognized were a sexual assault. And I love the way you separated those two. It helps other people, I think, to recognize in the complexities of relationships with their abuser that there may be things that are appropriate and good in that relationship, whatever that relationship is, but things that are sexual assaults. And you, in your heart, knew while you didn't have vocabulary, didn't have community back then, in your younger self. That's the other thing I'm just taken with is how well you knew that was wrong and how traumatizing that was for you and how you didn't want to go back and you searched the internet for what was happening to you to try to figure this out. And I think it's a message for all of us to trust our hearts and to recognize even when we don't have the tools, the experience, the perspective, that this is abuse, this is sexual abuse and it's wrong. And then to give your younger self a lot of grace because you didn't know what you know now. Then this line in your letter also, reclaiming my power from Dr. Broadbent. How powerful is that? And you have done that, Heather. And it's a credit to you. To me, it's a credit to the role of Jesus in her life, but it's also a credit to the role of therapists in her life because I always love the coffee cup I've seen. I guess it's a Diet Coke cup. We need Jesus and we need a therapist. And often Jesus answers our prayers for healing through a therapist that has the clinical skills. I think you reference EMDR therapy. So this is a great testament for really strong, brave, courageous people that need therapy to give them the tools to heal. It's a powerful letter. I'm so glad you read it. And there's just so many people that want to just give you a big hug right now. And you may be the first person that's ever helped them feel like they're not alone because they recognize what happened to them was a sexual assault for the first time in their life. They don't feel alone. And they don't feel it's their fault. So keep sharing. And if there's anything I said that's a little off, please.
I loved it. I think one thing I've learned is we don't have to know the name of something in order to suffer from it, no matter what it is. We don't have to understand it. We don't have to know what it is. I mean, that's why childhood sexual assault, it's still illegal. A child they might not even have memory. They don't have any context to anything. And it's still very illegal and very, very harmful. And so one thing that has bothered so many of us through this lawsuit is whether it's the argument against us legally or comments made. There's been several bigger news stations that have covered it, and there will be hundreds of comments. And well, you didn't even know you were sexually assaulted. How can you be so harmed by it? And that comment used to just tear me to shreds because I didn't have an answer for that. I thought, well, yeah, I know, right? Like, well, why am I so messed up? I didn't even know that this was the name of it. And that has nothing to do with it. I understood everything else other than the name for it. And I think that's not just with doctors, that's with anybody in a position of trust. They know what they're doing. It's not an accident. And it's not because anything's wrong with us. And I think the most important thing that I've learned through this is, and it's such a big, I think one thing I've learned about just the word shame, just the word shame is like some inherent belief that there's something wrong with you. And so it's almost like you want to hide it from other people so they won't see it. They won't see what's so wrong with you. And as you really delve into how this works and how we as humans respond to this type of a trauma, it really can allow so much of that shame to leave you. And I'm still on the path. It's not like I'm healed. You can clearly see I cried through this entire podcast. But I'm a functioning adult now. I am back to a normal self who is dealing with a really difficult thing. I mean, our lawsuit hasn't even started yet. It's been on hold for 3 years. But just shame is such a huge aspect of suffering.
Keep sharing. Are there things you'd like to share? And then I'll ask you some more questions.
Let me look through. I remember very, very early on, first or second session with my therapist, I had a very hard time opening. I knew I needed to, but I had a very hard time saying the words of what happened. And I remember her asking me, do you foresee, like, way down the future, do you foresee anything positive coming out of this? And I remember looking at her like she was crazy. Like, how could anything positive? Why would you even ask that? Like, I was offended by it even. How could you even think something positive could come out of this? And I would never, ever, ever have chosen that this happened. I would, if I could go back in time, the first complaints that were made against Broadbent before I was even born in 1984, he would have lost his license then. I never should have known his name. I never should have walked into his office. Everybody before me and everybody after me. I can't change that part of it. But my perspective, as I've been working through all of this, I absolutely can see that good has come from it. We have changed legislation to specifically state that medical malpractice does not include sexual assault. It ended up not being needed because the Utah Supreme Court came forward and stated it. That means other states can use it. Now, when this comes up in other states, they can cite this case. I am a different person. I said that before. It's like in sliding doors. I am a different person than I was 2.5 years ago. I am a better person than I was 2.5 years ago. I am a more confident person. I am a much more compassionate person towards people who were going through things I haven't gone through, that I don't understand. That doesn't allow me to have a judgment about it just because I don't understand something. I see myself as an advocate, and it is so empowering to have this idea that such a horrible thing can happen, but something good can come from it. It doesn't have to happen for nothing. And I think that would be the real tragedy here, is that we all go through this horrible, very traumatic experience for nothing. And that's whether we lose the lawsuit or win the lawsuit. I'm just talking about what comes from it. If some good can come from it, then something was worth it. There's a quote, I don't know who says it, but it's one of my favorites. And I think it's really inspiring. It says, I love when people that have been through hell walk out of the flames carrying buckets of water for those still consumed by the fire. And I'm not standing here thinking, oh, we've come in, we've changed the world. The fact that we are even able to do this is because of women before us who refused to follow the status quo, who refused to sit down, who refused to go down without a fight, even if they ended up losing. And to me, that is so inspiring. I am here because of the women before me, and I could protect people after me because of what we're going through today, and because of the changes that we're making today, and because of the pain that we're going through today. Then it's somehow worth it, somehow. And we're all going to be okay.
It's really powerful, Heather. This is the point where I wish all the questions in your mind that are listening you would like me to ask Heather that I can ask them. I'm struck with the line you said earlier, until you know what happened, you can't heal. I think you've kind of answered that, but I assume you're glad you got that text from your friend with a screen capture of Dr. Broadbent and that article that starting this whole path that was really very painful at first, realizing what had happened, and you've been processing this silently. And maybe that in the short term was more painful than, but if you want to just talk about that, because, it sounds like you're probably glad that you got that text.
I am very glad that I got that text. And like I said, it changed the trajectory. And in the short term, it was horrific in ways that I can't describe. My husband doesn't even realize how horrific, and that's with me describing it. Unless you're living in some tragic event, you can't really describe it. And at times, I remember thinking, having this need to kind of protect people from finding out. Like, don't let them know. Don't let them know what happened. Let them continue not feeling this. And as time has gone by, I realize that I owe it to myself. Like I said, the compassion and the forgiveness. And I talked so much about all of these things. I would say to my therapist, all like how ashamed I was and how stupid it was. And I used the word pathetic so many times. And she would stop me so often and say, "What would you say if somebody else said that? What would you say if one of the other Jane Does said that this was all their fault, and that if that person had said something, then everybody else after them wouldn't have?" I would, and every time I had a different answer when it was replying to somebody else saying the same words. And I think we are so much harder on ourselves sometimes. We give passes to people. I mean, she would say, "What would you say if your friend just said that to you?" And when I responded, I would say, "No, that's not true." And when I meant it, like I really mean it's not true. And so if we could switch our mindset to say, like, what if you talk to yourself how you would talk to other people, how you talk to people that you love, to people that you admire? What if you talk to yourself like that? We can just have so much more compassion for the difficulties that we're going through across any type of difficulties. It doesn't have to be sexual assault. It could be anything. But what would our thoughts be about somebody else and their struggles and how they're not doing well with it, or their thoughts that they're having about it? And almost always, it's only validation and compassion and trying to explain to them, no, why, no, this isn't your fault, or how could you have known better, whatever it is. And so now my perspective is completely different. I am very glad that I know about it now, because now I could heal, and I am a much better person. I like who I am better than I was 3 years ago. And so I do feel a little bit apprehensive. The more we come out, the more we shift. I have been the one unintentionally, sharing things that has been what has shown people that happened to me too. I was his patient. One of those was a foster kid. I had a very difficult time and a lot of guilt about opening this huge Pandora's box for people who, just like me, unsuspecting, going about their lives, just doing the best they can. And in the end, it's almost like we can just get through that really tough part and be compassionate with yourself and understand that there's nothing wrong with you, that it's expected and it's normal, that it's going to be horrible for a little while, and you can heal so much more, I think.
Terrific answer. You've got a really good therapist, it sounds like. I don't know if
I do, yes.
And I don't know if that's the first therapist you met, but this is my question. A lot of people had any advice for someone trying to find a good therapist, especially in this space?
Yes, one thing I do. So my sister is a therapist, and as she was talking, my sister was a believer in this EMDR, which maybe isn't for everybody. I don't think it's necessarily, but as she was telling me about it, I was like, well, that sounds fake. That sounds like um, a placebo or whatever it was, because it didn't seem possible. As I'm reading about the science of it, I just thought, well, that sounds like it's like a witch cast a spell or something. I don't know. Um, but it basically comes down to what specifically do you need and finding somebody who specializes in that. There are therapists who specialize in trauma. There's therapists who specialize in divorce or family relations or whatever. And specifically in situations like this, I absolutely would seek out a therapist who specializes in trauma. Um, and even if it's possible, trauma related to sexual assault, because it's a completely different um, it's its own monster, right? And so there's just specialties, I think, and I think if it's possible to seek that out.
Talk about your husband's not on the podcast, but he's part of this story. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like he became aware of this when, if I got this right, mostly when you opened up him after getting this text.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had talked to him during the time, and maybe shame, to your point, kept you from talking about it. And I love you talking about shame. But talk
it did
about.
keep me from talking about it in a certain sense, because I was so ashamed about how I just couldn't function. I was so ashamed about that. And I don't understand it. I didn't expect him to understand it. I literally had, like, the answer is that something is wrong with me. So there's so much shame around that. Like, I didn't want him to see it, but the problem was I couldn't hide it because I had no control over it. And so for him, I think it was probably really scary.
What did he do that was good, as he's been your partner? And just this is the advice for partner section of the podcast, that are walking with somebody that's
he has been that friend that I just talked about. How would you talk to your friend? He has been that person for me. When I had like the night before we went to the Utah Supreme Court, I was throwing up in the shower. I was a mess, and he just had me in his arms and saying, "Hey, they're gonna hear this crazy out there. Hey, they're gonna know how crazy this was, and they're gonna believe you. And of course, you have every right um, to be nervous about this, because those idiots dismissed it. They don't know what they're talking about." And um, talking to me as that same person as I'm talking to myself, saying the things that aren't helpful, being that person to, maybe argument isn't the word because it's not a fight, but argue with the false things that I'm saying that he knows not to be true. That what are they? My false beliefs, these false beliefs that I had inside me, that I would open up and share with him. And he didn't understand them, just like I didn't understand them. He didn't understand them even worse than I didn't understand them. And a huge loss of control for him. Like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to help. But he was always very, very, "You're going to get through this," instead of like, "What's the matter with you? Knock it off. Just move on past it," which is what I was telling myself and not helping. He has been a huge, huge help in me moving through this. Not to say I couldn't have done it without him, but it has been very nice when I'm laying in bed telling him, "No, we're going to lose, and it's all going to be this and this and this." And he's telling me, "No, you're going to win, because they're going to listen." And there's women on the U.S. Supreme Court. They know what an OBGYN does. They're going to know when they read that it's wrong, and telling me things like that. All of those kind of things. Even you don't have to understand somebody to just validate, I think.
I think it's a great answer. And I love that he was there with you the night before the Supreme Court, traveled together. And I just sense that that's part of this story is, and the shame it would create if a spouse withdrew, or a spouse says, "Don't talk about it," or a spouse says, "Put it behind you." And that just, I think one of the greatest things we can do in our lives is to take shame out of our lives, or to have the tools to take shame out of others people's lives. The longer I do this podcast, it's one of just my core beliefs. And sometimes a therapist is needed to do that. I also think it's one of the greatest things that can separate us from the love of God is somehow we can shame. And I think it's one of Satan's tools to think we're not worthy of God's love. There's no sin involved, obviously, in your situation, but there's shame. And sometimes we could falsely conclude if we feel this way about us, God must feel the same way. And it's disconnecting potentially our relationship with God. And I also recognize we've had some other guests on here. This is kind of a tangent, but some are doctors. We have a heavenly father and a heavenly mother. And I've had some survivors of sexual assault women that's really helped them because they've kind of had to rebuild their trust in men. And sometimes the fact there's a heavenly mother there has sustained them in their relationship with deity. So I love that beautiful part of our doctrine. Other things you just like to share, Heather, as we're just kind of winding up that come to your mind. I also love this story of, it helps me to understand because I'm not a survivor of a sexual assault. I've never, but when you talk about the work you did to go see a doctor in the city, and you couldn't even tell people why, it was illogical on the outside, and that creates shame. Maybe this is before you told anybody, but the work you did to see, I think, a female doctor in the city, just because you knew that would be a safe place for you, it just helps me. My heart just grows for you and the impact, the negative impact this was on you. And then my younger self, which might have dismissed this as not a big deal, or what we just wants to go back and slap my younger self in the face and say, this is a huge deal. You have to talk to survivors of sexual assault before you develop any conclusions about people in this space, because this is heartbreaking and painful and wrong. And your letter does as great a job as I've heard of articulating that. But just anything you want to share.
I think just similar to what you just brought up of me going through extra lengths this was before we even lived in Arkansas. So I didn't realize why I wanted to go to a female doctor. I just knew they were nicer. I knew I felt better around them. I knew I wasn't as scared. And it's a difference between me literally shaking in my chair and not being able to sleep the night before versus, I have a 4-hour trip to go there and back, but that's okay. Compared to well, how bad is it to sit in that chair? That's how bad. And that avoidance, when you're in such a dark place like that, avoidance is really you're protecting yourself the best way that you know how in the moment, and that changes. It's a dynamic thing, and I think us understanding that also helps remove the shame from it. Well, I wasn't avoiding it because whatever reason, fill in the blank. It was because I was protecting myself the best way that I knew how, and that's all I knew. There are many women in our lawsuit, many of these Jane Does who never went back to an OBGYN. And so that means whether they were having symptoms that really were concerning for very good reasons that they should have gone, they avoided it. It was better to suffer with whatever it was or some serious worry that they had or whatever than go to an OBGYN. And so avoidance can play a huge part in this type of trauma, this type of shame, this type of the PTSD that I've learned all about. I've heard about it like in war, soldiers come back and they have PTSD, and I was suffering from it for 10 years and didn't know. 15 years and didn't know. I didn't know that's what it was. It was, I just really freak out around doctors, and I just can't sleep before. I always feel like I'm going to throw up before, and I always, my heart always goes crazy, and so they think I have a heart problem. But I don't know why. And I mean, like I said, you can suffer from something without knowing the name for it. And I think it just comes down to really, when you really know about it, when you really know why, it really takes, I feel like it just really takes just learning about it and knowing it's not you. It's just like I'm a human, and that's how humans deal with it. It's because I'm not a robot.
Love that. I love it. Thinking back to, when I was a YSA bishop, listeners, and sometimes in hard situations, maybe a therapist taught me, because I've seen a therapist a couple times in my life, sometimes to write a letter to the person that's causing pain in your life. And that can be a therapeutic. I guess journaling is that, but this is sort of I think there's a journal that you write that other people read someday, but this is more private, something you might not ever want anybody to read. But I love that you wrote this letter, and some people that I love, you felt it was impressed to send it, and just this evolving, and then you were going to not have it be by you, but you wanted to be by you. And so there's so many paths to healing, but I recognize writing is helpful for some people, and writing a letter to the abuser is sometimes helpful to put all that out. It's a very well written letter, very thoughtful, very insightful. And so I just admire that part of your story and your courage to write that letter. I also thought about what I wrote down just right now in my notes is the culture you have in your family. You've still got, 4 kids at home. And I wrote probably a culture in your family where you can have hard, real conversations. You both have the tools to be able
Absolutely.
to talk about real things. So your kids hopefully will never be, walking the same road you are, but there's something about your story and just that I'm guessing your kids will just always know that mom and dad can handle hard conversations. And if there are things about my life I need to open up about to my parents, they're going to be a safe place for me to process that. And I think that's some of the best family moments we have as parents, when our kids feel safe to open up with us about the reality of their lives. And we have tools. Sometimes we need therapists. We also have some tools within the marriage partnership to help our kids. I don't know if that resonates with you, but I just think it's part of your courage to be open about this sexual assault that is going to forever help the rest of your family.
I think so, because I have 4 boys, and as all this was happening, I'm realizing and reading the horrible comments from public comments, which I know everyone says, why don't even read the comments? Well, I can't help it. I have to read the comments. Horrible comments about, those blankety blanks will do anything for money these days, or women will do anything for attention, or we church members really need to stand behind Dr. Broadbent in this, because the devil is strong and he's gotten to these women, or things like this.
Oh my gosh.
I am adamant that I will raise my boys differently, and I want them, it has to be in my home, and it has to be me showing them these hurtful things towards women, and not in a overly, non-age appropriate way, but showing them these things so that they can know this does exist. They can see it and not grow up being oblivious, but no, you're just a man hater or whatever. And because I'm not a man hater, I have a husband and I have 4 boys, and I want them to grow up with a deep respect for women, and a deep respect for believing women, and for not gaslighting women's stories, and having hard conversations, and not being avoidant. And I'm wanting them to have things that probably a lot of people my generation and everybody above didn't have. Like nobody had therapists ever. We didn't have medications for things. So I'm wanting to raise good boys that turn into good men. That's very important to me, and it revolves around a lot of hard conversations that I don't want them having shame in their lives, because they all have struggles, and I know that as kids we can grow up with shame about all kinds of things that are normal. And so that it does resonate. Yeah.
That's terrific. I just think that's another chapter in your story that in 10, 20 years, you'll come back and say, well, let me tell you some more about that. And these are going to be beautiful family moments made possible because of your courage. And talk about this. You said a statement I want you just to define. I kind of have a hunch of how you define it, but I thought it'd be better Not gaslighting women's stories. Will you just define that for listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to where to start. I want to write a book about that question.
Happened to you a
women
lot.
We're all gaslit. We're gaslit all the time about our stories. I sat through, I mean, we have, at the time, right now it's 213, much more than that, but at the time it was 94. 94 women with very, very similar allegations from across the country who have never met each other and never talked online, all with this very, very similar, if not the same allegations. And men will call us money hungry, or say that Dr. Broadbent never would have done that because I know him, or so it's literally one man versus 94 women. You're discounting 94 women's stories that all match up who have never met for one man. That feels horrible. As a woman, it feels horrible, especially, I mean, women have been sexually assaulted since the cavemen, and it's horribly traumatic in all types of scenarios, all types of ways. Less than 1% of men are actually charged and actually serve time for those sexual assaults, whether they report it or not. And so this whole time for the past 3 years, so many of us have been here, well, number one, well, why didn't you say anything? And then the women who did say something, they were told, oh, that doesn't count as sexual assault. That was medical care. Or the police, even in the 80s, told them, no, you can't file a police report about that because that's medical care. And so it's almost like this constant doubting women's stories, as if it's just this enjoyable thing to just create drama and trauma, and just because I don't know. I think the things that we deal with in this scenario would be unacceptable for a man. A man would be so upset if he was sexually assaulted. If 94 men were sexually assaulted by one woman, and in a group of women on a stand in judges' suits told them that they just didn't understand what was happening because they were young and naive. It's just so insulting. It's just so degrading, demoralizing, and any woman, I think, could give a similar answer. I don't think that my insight into that is anything special.
I like that's a term that I've just tried to better understand, listeners. Gaslighting or gaslit. It's something that I've heard more over the last few years, and I've recognized it's a real thing. And I think it's good to recognize when we potentially do that. I've probably been guilty of that in the past, and when we know better, we do better. And often it's through listening to people's stories. The name it in the show notes will link to the Instagram account. If you want to contact Heather, if you want to DM that Instagram account, that's not healthcare. A well-named Instagram. The Instagram account is pretty straightforward. Survivors of Utah OBGYND Broadbent. Changing Utah laws, seeking justice, and raising awareness around sexual assault and healthcare. So a terrific Instagram account. And there's other resources that Heather can probably link to you. I think there's a private Facebook group that's vetted that the actual victims can join.
Yeah, there's a private Facebook group specifically for the women in this lawsuit. And so we're able to have a private conversations about support or big struggles or all kinds of things. Maybe some big thing coming up that we're nervous about or whatever. And so, yeah, it is vetted. So everybody in there is an actual member, and probably a good place to reach out with any question about that would probably be the Instagram. That's not healthcare. And then somebody could direct you to whatever it is that you're wondering about or asking about or commenting about.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love you have that private Facebook group. That's probably just a sacred place. I'm glad you vet it so there's no, people in there that don't belong in there. And I would guess that's just a really sacred place where people can share their experiences. And I'm grateful for technology. Technology is a bad thing sometimes, but that's a great example of bringing survivors together in a common case.
And I think one of my favorite things about it is most of us are still anonymous. Most of us are still going by Jane Doe, and it's 100% accepted without judgment. It's almost expected. Well, of course you're going to want to stay anonymous. This is horrible. And so you can still be in a Facebook group with each other with an expectation and a complete, it's almost like this guardianship over it that this is not, it's just so respected. And we're from all different types of groups. We're all different types of people, but there's just this really deep understanding of each other there, and this deep connection that we can't find anywhere else. And it's just, nobody needs to be out with their name and all these things to be members of this. It's just you come as you are, and fine.
It's great. I'm thinking of a shout out to our son, Jake Osler. He's a licensed clinical social worker, and he is working with survivors of sex trafficking. So he's in a sister space that you're in, and grateful for all the therapists that are in this really difficult space, bringing hope and healing. And you're some of my heroes too. And so that's about all I have. Do you have anything you want to share in closing, Heather?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I hopefully it was.
It's really helpful.
Yeah, helpful in some way.
And this may be the most helpful podcast we've ever done for some people that have never heard somebody give them hope on the road they're walking, because you've walked this road. I read this quote a lot, listeners. Maybe I haven't read it in 10 podcasts. So a minister's service, this is you, Heather, will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from a heart wounded by the suffering about which he or she speaks. The great illusion of leadership is to think others can be led of a desert by someone who's never been there. That's by Henry.
Yeah, I really love that. Yeah.
It's Henry Nora in the book called The Wounded Healer. And so you are wounded, as you've accurately addressed, but you're healing and healer. And now, because of your courage to be on this podcast, you can lead other people out of this terrible desert of sexual assault. But you can do that authentically. It's not theoretical, it's authentic. And you give grace for everybody that doesn't need to put their name on it, that there's still, there's no shame in that. I love the way you give space for other survivors to walk this road a little bit differently. And this is just your story. It's part of your maturity in this space. And I think it's just so helpful. So on behalf of those listeners that are just, so grateful for your courage, because it gives them hope in their individual journey. Thank you, Heather Prinz, for being on the podcast and the good life you're living and your courage to do this. And so this is Richard Osler in Salt Lake City and Heather Prinz in Fayetteville, Arkansas, signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.